For Black History Month, I'm talking about the work of one Black biblical scholar or theologian every day, and today is Cheryl Anderson's book, Women, Ideology, and Violence. Anderson's book uses critical theory to examine the ways in which laws pertaining to violence, sexuality, and sexual violence are either similarly or differently applied to men and women in two Pentateuchal legal collections, the Covenant Code, Exodus 21 through 23, and the Deuteronomic Code, Deuteronomy 12 through 26. Anderson's findings in this study are not terribly surprising. Laws pertaining to violence are fairly egalitarian, treating men and women roughly the same, whereas laws pertaining to sexuality are quite differentiated on the basis of gender, giving men much more sexual freedom and placing a larger legal and reproductive burden on women. Interestingly, laws pertaining to sexual violence are full of ambiguous language and one-off case law that can make it very difficult to interpret these passages without making some assumptions about the author's ideological biases. If this was all that Anderson's book was, it would be a very methodical and focused examination of two deeply interwoven legal traditions in the Pentateuch and would be quite valuable for it. But in the final chapter of Anderson's book, she raises questions that have enduring significance for all biblical interpretation. Anderson points out that biblical interpreters today are often quite willing to subject the ideological biases of the Bible's authors to scrutiny, but they're far less likely to subject their own ideological biases to the same kind of scrutiny. Indeed, since the ideological biases of an interpreter affects every aspect of their interpretation, we only ever have access to the ideological biases of the text's authors, so far as we are able to reconstruct them, through the lens of our own ideological biases. There is no objective evaluation or reconstruction of a text's ideological biases. This is particularly problematic when it comes to our interpretation of some of this ambiguous language in the laws concerning sexual violence. Anderson points out that our own legal and cultural situation with respect to sexual violence in the contemporary United States is not in a good place today, with sexual assault being massively underreported and with reported sexual assault being massively underprosecuted. Since cultural context affects ideology, and since our cultural context is not ideal with respect to this issue, we have good reason to be suspicious about our ideological biases and the effect that they're having on our interpretation of these difficult passages. In the final analysis, Cheryl Anderson's book should endow us with a sense of interpretive humility and remind us that our positive or negative evaluations of these legal collections in the Pentateuch always come from a particular ideological vantage point that is impossible for us to escape.